Great. Hi, everyone. This is Marissa Machado, COO for the Texas Association for Home Care and Hospice. I'd like to welcome you to the impact of the Review Choice Demonstration Project on your agency webinar today. We are kicking off another great year of great education provided by Lyles Parker attorneys and counselors at law. And we are very grateful for their continued support of TAC and the home care and hospice industry. As you know, the order in which CMS will roll out RCD has not been technically announced. Although RCD is set to take effect in Illinois first, CMS data is showing Texas had a higher improper payment rate in 2018. It was 21.2 versus 18.4 in Illinois. So we could be the next state after Illinois. Because of this, we are preparing and have secured PGBA and an Illinois provider for 2 comprehensive RCD conferences in June. These will be in Garland and San Antonio on the 18th and 19th. In San Antonio, we'll be offering a virtual conference opportunity from that San Antonio location. For more information on these upcoming events, please go to our education page at tac.org. This webinar qualifies for 1 hour of continuing education for administrators and nurses. If you did not sign up for this webinar through the TAC website, you may use the PDF form attached to the webinar to order your CEs. The cost is $10 per person. Now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today. Lorraine Rosado is a key member of Lyles Parker's healthcare team and has been an attorney at the firm for nearly 6 years. She defends healthcare providers facing overpayment claims and counsels clients nationwide on compliance with healthcare statutes, regulations, and contract matters. Lorraine has handled claims disputes involving most major healthcare payers. She has extensive experience working on complex cases involving both federal and state violations of the False Claims Act, including whistleblower cases. Ms. Ashley Morgan is an associate attorney at Lyles Parker, Washington, D.C. office, where she focuses her practice on regulatory healthcare compliance matters, fraud and abuse, and reimbursement issues. Ashley particularly knowledgeable about the regulatory challenges faced by the home care providers, especially as they relate to issues of documentation, and has extensive experience working on administrative appeals at a large alleged extrapolated, that's a really hard word to say, overpayments assessed by CMS and contractors. Ashley also assists providers across the country with a wide variety of healthcare law issues, including coverage disputes, documentation concerns, compliance, medical board complaints, and exclusion and termination issues. Ashley earned her Juris Doctor cum laude from the American University Washington College of Law in Washington, D.C., and received a Bachelor's of Science from James Madison University, Harrisburg, Virginia. Ashley is also a certified medical compliance officer and a certified medical reimbursement specialist. So take it away, Lorraine and Ashley. We look forward to this webinar and getting us up to speed and getting us some good practices and preparing for RCD. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marissa. I think, Ashley, you're going to kick it off. Is that right?
Yes, I can go through the outline. So we're going to start off today with a background on the Review Choice Demonstration Project. Then we're going to talk about the design of the actual project and the different options that you have. Then we're going to review some of the comments and responses to the 60-day Federal Register notice. And then we're going to discuss the practical impact of the Review Choice Demonstration Project on the home health and agencies in Texas. So the rationale for the Review Choice Demonstration Project was that the government believes that there is extensive evidence of fraud and abuse in the Medicare home health benefit. As you can see on the screen, the OIG investigations have resulted in more than 350 criminal and civil actions and $975 million in receivables for fiscal years 2011 to 2015. So that's just in a 4-year period. They've recovered that much money just for fraud and abuse investigations for the home benefit for Medicare. Over the past several years, the comprehensive error rate testing program has had a continuously estimated significantly high home health improper payment rate as well. That improper payment rate is ranging for home health agencies between 32% to 59%. So they think essentially that over half of the home health claims that are being submitted to Medicare for payment are actually improper and shouldn't be paid. So that could be based on, medical necessity, on an improper face-to-face referral, on the patient not being homebound, or based on plan of care issues. The authority for this project is from the Social Security amendments. It authorizes the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services to essentially identify new methods to improve investigation and prosecution actions for the health programs under the Social Security Act. So CMS has pretty broad authority to develop new programs under this statutory authority to implement demonstration projects like this. The goal of the project is for the home health services to assist in developing methods they're saying that, they want to identify fraud. That's the whole basis for this program. They're trying to ferret out fraud and prevent bad actors from providing services in our beneficiaries' homes. We also want to reduce the rate of improper payments that are being made to providers. So where they're seeing, that over half of the payments are improper, they want to reduce that level and get it much lower so that we're not spending government dollars on services that aren't medically reasonable and necessary. CMS is hoping that the demonstration project will see how many, what kind of resources they need to actually implement a permanent review choice program for home health services. So, and that's important because they are essentially taking this as a test to see whether or not we can do some sort of continuous review of all the home health agencies across the country at some point, so that we're always constantly reviewing and making sure that our claims are proper. So this is something that once it's been started for you, it's something you're going to want to get used to, because it's something that they want to do for a very long time moving forward. They're also testing out different types of claim review. We're going to get into the different types that you're going to have an option for. But they're going to test out different types of review options for you to see which actually is going to be the best one to prevent payment for services that have historically had a high instance of fraud. So we know that right now the UPICs have a lot of authority to do different types of reviews, and that's the main resource we've seen them use. And some of these are similar to some of the tools that UPICs have, but there are some differences. And also determine the return on investment of the review choices for the home health claim. So see, if CMS is bringing in the amount of money that they think they're going to be saving based on the amount of money they're spending on doing these in-depth reviews of the providers. Okay, so the predecessor to the Review Choice Demonstration Project, some of you, if you're in Illinois, you may have a very vivid memory of the Pre-Claim Review Demonstration Project. It was started in Illinois in August of 2016 and was then paused not even a year later and was never expanded to any other states. Some of the outcomes that they saw was that by week 11 of the project, which ended in October of 2016, CMS was seeing a wide variation in the number of affirm rates by home health agencies, which means that they were seeing a wide variation in the number of claims that were getting actually paid through the process. Some home health agencies were getting all of their claims paid, whereas other home health agencies were getting no claims paid. But many of the home health agencies were somewhere in the middle of these two. By week 24, which was in January of 2017, 91% of the pre-claim review requests were receiving an affirmation initially, and then were both fully affirmed or partially affirmed after the initial review. The chart that you see on the screen shows the improved payment rate. So you can see we have, week 1 or week 3, we're at 30% and 40% for combined fully affirmed and partially affirmed. The red line is partially affirmed, and the blue line is fully affirmed, and the green is both partially and fully affirmed. So you can see, as we get progressively towards, week 12, we're getting up to close to 80%. And then once we get to week 24, we're almost we're above 90% for the combined. We're a little bit below it for the fully affirmed. And so we're doing much better by that point. But based on this initial project that CMS did with the pre-claim review demonstration, they did halt it and decide to make some changes to make things easier for providers, which is now what we're seeing with the review choice demonstration project. Okay, so this project is essentially a 5-year review choice process for home health agency providers in several states. So there are Illinois, Ohio, North Carolina, Florida, and Texas. These states were identified because they are known areas for fraudulent behavior and either have a high home health improper payment rate or a high denial rate during the probe and target and educate reviews that CMS conducts. This new project was supposed to start in December of 2018, but the approval has not yet been received. And as we all know, the government was just shut down for quite a while, and it may be shutting down again. So, but CMS has still been operating to our knowledge, but we don't know what date they're actually going to announce the start date for Illinois, and that might be affected by another shutdown. I don't know that, but it's something you want to be aware of, that we were supposed to start, so we are going to be starting sometime soon in Illinois. Something else you want to think about is all of the states that were identified all have the same Medicare administrative contractor. It's going to be Palmetto, who is doing this project for CMS. They're the main contractor. Oops, let me go back. Home health agencies are going to have the choice of 3 different options. There is a pre-claim review, a post-payment review option, or a minimal post-payment review option where you're going to essentially just be able to submit claims and get paid at 25% of what you would generally get paid for your services without having to do the prepay or the post-pay option. If you select either of the first 2 options, then pre-claim or post-payment review is going to be required for every single episode of care that you submit. And your compliance with the billing, coding, and coverage requirements are going to determine the next steps under the demonstration project. So I'm going to get into the weeds with you a little bit about the different options that you're going to have. So this is a chart that goes through what the actual 3 different options are. So choice 1 is one that you'll probably be the most familiar with. It's like prepayment review. Providers, if anyone from Illinois is listening, this is similar to the pre-claim review that you had initially. So the home health agency is going to request a pre-claim review for all of the episodes that you have. And you're going to receive that ADR, and you're going to have to submit the documentation to Palmetto for review. They're going to undergo a prepayment review for that, and you can, when you submit your documentation, when you submit your initial pre-claim review request, you can request more than 1 episode in that request. And CMS is essentially going to review your documentation. They're going to affirm it or they're going to deny it. Now, they are saying that the MACs will be working with providers. They're going to be affirmatively working with providers, and they're saying we're going to proactively reach out to providers to discuss any documentation issues that they see during the pre-claim review process, and that providers are going to have an unlimited opportunity to resubmit documentation prior to the final claim for payment in order to correct the issue. So that's what they're saying. So, if you initially get a denial on that claim, the MAC is going to reach out to you and say, okay, we're seeing some issues with your documentation, whether that's with the face-to-face documentation, or if it's with your plan of care, or maybe the skilled need wasn't documented properly. And the MAC's going to tell you that, yes, we do see some issues with this. Can you get us any other documentation to support this? Maybe you're missing the encounter note for the face-to-face, so you'll need to reach out to the doctor to get that face-to-face note to the MAC for review. And that way we can get the claim, we can get all that documentation in and get that claim paid before your final payment in order to correct that issue. So that's going to go on for at least a period of 6 months. And after 6 months, then they're going to do a review of your approval rating. And if you have a 90% or greater rating after 6 months, then you're going to get some additional options of what you can do moving forward. And I'm going to get into those after I go through the other 2 options. So the second option is a post-payment review option. So in this option, you're going to submit claims just like you always have for each episode of service. They're going to be paid and processed just like they always have been. And then after the claim is paid and processed, Palmetto is going to send you an ADR and essentially follow the post-payment audit review procedures. If you've ever been subject to a post-payment audit review, you know kind of how that goes. They're going to send you an ADR, and similar to the pre-claim review, we're going to send in the documentation, and they're going to see if it qualifies for coverage and payment. And at that point, they'll say, similar to the pre-claim option, well, it doesn't meet skilled need, it doesn't meet face-to-face, it doesn't meet the plan of care requirements. So they'll review that, and they will either deny it or they will pay it. If it's denied, then we're going to need to again work with the MAC to make sure we get the documentation that we need to support that claim. And what I've read, they've only specified that the MAC's going to be proactively reaching out to providers for the pre-claim review option. So under the post-payment review option, I don't see where they're going to be necessarily proactively reaching out to you. So under that option, you're likely going to just have to go ahead and then appeal those claims through the appeals process if you're missing documentation. So you're going to get back a decision from Palmetto saying, no, we don't think this claim qualified for coverage and payment. Then they're going to say you have a certain amount of time to appeal this, or we're going to recoup that money from you. And it's going to be very similar to the standard appeals process that many of you are used to. So we want to make sure we're appealing the claims through that process. Typically under the standard appeals process, you have 41 days to appeal for redetermination before they're going to recoup that money for that claim. So you want to get that documentation prepared and that redetermination request off to Palmetto as soon as possible. And then Palmetto would issue a decision within 60 days as to whether they agree that you did have that additional documentation or they didn't. And then if not, then you'll have to appeal to reconsideration, which you'll have 60 days to avoid recoupment again on that claim. And then they'll take 60 days to issue another decision. And then if you still have an adverse decision at that point, then you'll have to appeal to an administrative law judge. And as many of us know, there is quite a backlog for administrative law judge hearings right now. So hopefully you can get it resolved before then. But we are seeing, significant backlogs at as much as 3 to 5 years for hearings for administrative law judge hearings. So it's much better to make sure when you're sending this documentation in at the outset that you're looking at it up front, making sure that you have all of your face-to-face documentation, all of your plan of care documentation, and all of your notes to fully support those services, that you have thorough OASIS reports and everything like that. For the post-payment review option, they're also going to be calculating your approval rate every 6 months. And then based on the approval rate, if you're at 90% or higher, you may have another option. to have less checking for every single claim. But for both of these two options, it's going to be every single claim. You're either going to be submitting documentation at the outset before you get paid, or you're going to be submitting documentation after you've gotten paid, and then worrying about whether or not Medicare is going to recoup that money from you in the post-payment option. So this is probably one of the biggest differences, is that you can choose to get paid at the outset, as opposed to last time where you weren't getting paid until that claim was approved. But you want to be careful, because if you do select this post-payment review option, you want to know that you're not going to get a second bite at the apple like CMS is saying you're going to get under the pre-claim review option. You're not going to get that opportunity to talk with them and to put in additional documentation before a final decision is made. You're just going to have to start appealing that claim and making sure you keep track of that appeal for every single one of these home health benefits that gets paid. These aren't going to be all combined into one neat appeal that, you know, is like 30 claims that you can appeal all in one package to the contractor for review. These are going to be individual appeals that you need to track and identify to make sure you don't miss any of your timely filing deadlines. The last choice that we have is a minimal review, and you can get a 25% payment reduction with this option. So with this option, the home health agency will essentially just continue to submit claims like you always have, but you're just going to get paid less for that option. If you don't want to submit any documentation or deal with the post-payment review option, then you will just continue to submit claims. You may still be subject to a RAC review or to the targeted probe and educate reviews. You can also still be subject to a UPIC review, a Unified Program Integrity Contractor review, if they suspect fraud. If your claims are denied, they have normal appeal rights, but you're just going to get paid 25% less on all of your claims. And they also noted that the 25% payment reduction is non-transferable to the beneficiary and is not subject to appeal. So for this option, this is a very important difference for this option. If you choose to do this option, then you are going to remain in this option for the duration of the demonstration project. They're not doing an approval rating calculated after 6 months, and then you can decide to switch options. If you stay in this, if you pick this option at the outset, you are stuck here for good, and you will just continue to have this for the duration of the 5-year project. So that's really important to think about. So if you're making, you know, a business decision as to whether or not we want to deal with this headache of submitting all of this additional documentation, you want to say, well, can we afford to get 25% less on all of our claims instead? Is that worth it to us to get a little bit less money to not deal with this administrative headache of submitting documentation for all of the claims and appealing the claims? But you do want to keep in mind that you may still be subject to a UPIC or a RAC review or target probe and educates, but you're subject to those right now. But you do want to keep that in mind, that maybe they might, you know, consider doing that more if you're not actually participating in the program. And I will say that I have seen some communication about the initial pre-claim review project, and providers who chose to not participate in that project, they waited until the project was paused to submit all of their claims for payment. Referrals were made to UPICs by CMS based on providers' behaviors during this initial demonstration project. So it's likely that your behavior during this project as well, they're going to be submitting referrals to UPICs based on your participation in this project and what, you know, they're seeing about your claims. That doesn't mean that if you choose one of the pre-claim review or the post-payment review options that you're insulated from UPIC audits either, but it's just something that you really want to think about. Okay, so if you pick the pre-claim review or the post-payment review option, after 6 months, they're going to calculate your error rate, and they're going to see how you're doing, how many of your claims are getting approved, how many are getting denied. And If you have an approval rating of 90% or greater after that 6-month period, then you're going to have the additional option of a spot check review of only 5% of your claims to ensure continued compliance in the program. So if you look at the chart, you can see that you're moving down. Was the affirmation rate 90% or higher? If it's no, if your affirmation rate was lower than 90%, then you essentially, we're playing a board game, you go back up to start. And you can then, again, you can select at that point whether you are going to continue with the pre-claim review option, or you can switch to the post-payment review option. And that way, you can, if you've been doing the pre-claim review and you're not getting enough revenue coming in and you want to switch to the post-payment review option, then at that point you can go ahead and switch to that option so that you're at least getting money coming in at that point. And then you just need to worry about making sure you're timely appealing any denials. So that's something to consider, that maybe we'll start out with this pre-claim review option, see if the MAC's actually working with us on our documentation, and that we're submitting that, getting it approved. And then if it's not working for you, if you can make it 6 months under that initial period, then when you get to that 6-month period, you can switch to the post-payment review option, so that you can actually get some money in on the outset. If you do have an approval rating of 90% or higher, then you can do a spot check review. So you can do 5%. The MAC will essentially pick 5% of your claims every 6 months that they're going to review, and they're going to send the ADRs and follow the standard CMS prepayment review procedures. But this is a nice option because it's not going to be, you've proven to them that most of your claims qualify for coverage and payment, and they're just going to select a small handful every 6 months, take a quick peek at those, and you'll continue doing that same spot check throughout the rest of the program. You can also, if you don't want to do the spot check, you can do a selective post-payment review option. Under this option, your claims are going to be paid according to the normal claim processes, and the MAC is going to review a statistically valid random sample every 6 months. And that always puts everybody, including myself, on edge hearing the word statistically valid random sample, because what does that mean? It essentially means that the MAC's going to take that 6-month period, pick a handful of claims, look at it, and they're going to say, okay, well, for this 6-month period, you've had, say, 80% of the claims are wrong. So we want not back just the few claims we looked at, money for those few claims that we're looking at, where we want back 80% of all of the money that we paid you during this previous 6-month period. And then you're going to need to appeal that overpayment amount that they're alleging through the regular appeals process. If you do pick the selective post-payment review option, then I also want to note here that you're going to remain active in this choice for the rest of the 5 years. So there's 2 of these options where you're essentially getting stuck into a selection for the rest of the period. So you want to really think about how, I know that this is a better option because you're getting paid at the outset for all of these claims, but you want to be careful because this possibility, in my opinion, really has it really has the possibility of being dangerous for home health care agencies, because you have the possibility that they're going to say that you have a high error rate and you owe a lot of money back for that 6-month period. Then you're going through the appeals process, and 6 months later you're going to have this same problem again, and you're not going to be able to opt out of this program to go back to the pre-claim review for for the rest of the 5-year period. So you really want to be careful. So to review, just because I know this is a lot of information for you, for the pre-claim review option, that's your first option up here. That's going to be where you initiate the pre-claim review process by submitting a pre-claim review request to Palmetto with all of the relevant documentation that you need to support your home health services. You can, your request for review can specify a specific number of episodes for the beneficiary that's being reviewed. The MAC is going to review these options and determine whether or not they qualify for coverage and payment. The Palmetto is going to communicate a decision to you that either provisionally affirms that service or non-affirms that service. They can work with you. They say they're going to be working with you to get additional documentation if you need it, to make sure by the time it's time for that final claim to be paid that you are getting paid for that service. They have said that the MAC is trying to make all reasonable efforts to make that initial decision within 10 business days. So that's something to think about. You're going to have about 10 days before you hear anything from them. If you have a non-affirmative decision on that initial review request, the MAC's going to then take 20 days to review that additional documentation to then communicate to you as to whether at this point it meets all of the requirements or not. These claims that are that have a provisional affirmative pre-claim review decision will be paid in full as long as your documentation was billed and submitted correctly. And then once you have gone through this process for 6 months, then you will have the opportunity to see what your affirmation rate is. And if it's higher than 90%, then you can go down to the bottom and do a spot check or selective post-payment review. If it's lower than 90%, then you're going to go back up to start, and you can choose whether you want to continue pre-claim review or whether you want to switch to one of the other options, including this post-payment review option. To review for the post-payment review option, you're going to essentially submit your claims as usual. Submit them, they're going to get paid, and then Palmetto is going to submit an ADR to you. You're going to send in all your documentation, and that's going to be reviewed by Palmetto. They're going to make a decision on whether the documentation complies with the coverage requirements, and you're going to have to appeal each of these claims individually. And then for this one, after 6 months as well, if you're higher than 90%, you can choose one of the subsequent options. Or if you're lower than 90%, you can decide to stay in post-payment, or you can go to the pre-claim review option. If you don't want to do pre-claim or post-pay, you can again do choice 3, which is the minimal review, where you're just going to be stuck in this option for 5 years, but you're not going to have to submit any documentation, but you are going to receive 25% less on all of your claims. And again, to review just quickly, those last 2 options for if your affirmation rate is 90% or higher, we have the selective post-payment or the spot check. The selective post-pay is where you're going to have every 6 months, they're going to do a statistically valid random sample of your claims and review those. They may extrapolate for that whole 6-month period. And if you choose this option, you're going to be stuck in this option for the rest of the time of the demonstration project as well. If you do the spot check option, you're going to continue to submit claims, and the MAC's going to select 5% of your claims every 6 months to do a review. They'll send ADRs to you, and it'll be similar to pre-payment review or Target Program Educate, where you get those ADRs, you send the claim, the documentation in, and they're going to take a look at those for you. So now that we've gone over the background of the project and some of the details of the different options, Lorraine is going to talk to you about some practical considerations pertaining to the Medicare rule and policy. Sorry about that confusion in the beginning, everyone.
Thank you, Ashley, so much. That background and overview of RCD was really helpful. And I do really like that diagram from CMS because it does help to simplify the choices and the nuances of the rounds. But if you guys have any questions about this, certainly feel free to send a message in the chat, and we will answer any questions at the end of the webinar, or feel free to call us after. We're happy to go over this with you on the phone. And one of the things that I wanted to quickly mention before jumping into the practical considerations is that there are very limited circumstances where we would recommend that an agency take a 25% reduction off the claims. Most home health agencies we represent are really doing good work, and there may be technical issues or medical necessity issues that can be fixed typically, maybe not for a specific claim, but certainly with some updates to documentation practices and things like that, the claims can achieve payment. So we don't typically recommend that an agency accept the reduction. So with that, I'm going to go over some of the practical considerations pertaining to Medicare rules and policies, because there has been considerable confusion about the review choice demonstration project. The first thing is that Medicare coverage policies are not changed under the demonstration. So a Medicare beneficiary still has to meet certain requirements under the Social Security Act, including being confined to the home, under the care of a physician, receiving services under a plan of care established and periodically reviewed by a physician, and they still need to be in need of skilled nursing care on an intermittent basis, physical therapy or speech language pathology, or have a continuing need for occupational therapy. So again, Medicare coverage policies are not changed under the review choice demonstration project. The RDC does not create any new documentation requirements either. So your documentation requirements still include, for example, a plan of care timely signed by a qualifying certifying physician, which includes pertinent diagnoses, patient's mental status, the types of services, supplies, and equipment required, the frequency of visits to be made, prognosis, rehabilitation potential, functional limitations, activities permitted, and so on. All of that content is still required to be in the plan of care. Documentation requirements also still include a physician certification wherein the physician certifies that the home health services are needed because the patient is confined to the home, the patient needs skilled nursing services on an intermittent basis, or physical therapy or speech therapy, that a plan of care has been established and is periodically reviewed by a physician, that the services are furnished while the patient is under the care of a physician, and that a face-to-face encounter occurred no more than 90 days prior to or within 30 days after the start of the home health care, was related to the primary reason the patient requires home health services, and was performed by an allowed provider type. And also, in terms of the face-to-face encounter, the actual medical record of the face-to-face encounter is still being used to determine the patient's eligibility for the Medicare home health benefit. So again, Medicare documentation requirements, including with respect to the plan of care, physician certification, and face-to-face, are not changed under the review choice demonstration project. Home health agencies will still be able to submit their request for anticipated payment, or RAP, in the same manner, and they're subject to the same rules as they currently would be without the demonstration project being in place. Also unchanged are the following list of items, and I'll go through them a little bit. So advanced beneficiary notices. The agency should still issue ABNs to beneficiaries where Medicare payment is expected to be denied and the agency wants to transfer potential financial liability to the Medicare beneficiary. The ABN rules, which can be found in Chapter 30 of the Medicare Claims Processing Manual, remain the same. Claim appeal rights, and this is something that Ashley discussed a little bit as well. To the extent that claims are denied or downcoded through the pre-claim or post-payment review process, the agency is entitled to appeal the adverse determinations through the usual Medicare appeals process. Ashley briefly went over some of the stages, but I'll quickly mention the 5 stages again. So you have redetermination, which you can file within 41 days to prevent recoupment, but the outer deadline is 180 days. And then the second level is reconsideration. You can file within 60 days to prevent recoupment, but the outer deadline is 120 days. As Ashley mentioned, you then have 60 days from an adverse reconsideration decision to file for an ALJ. And then beyond that, you also have 60 days to file the Medicare Appeals Council. And if your claim or claims remain favorable at that stage, you have 60 days to request judicial review in federal court from the date of the Medicare Appeals Council determination. And as a reminder, you have to exhaust an administrative appeals process before going to federal district court. Dual eligible coverage requirements remain the same. So dual eligible beneficiaries generally describes beneficiaries who are eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid. The phrase includes beneficiaries enrolled in Medicare Part A and or B and receiving full Medicaid benefits and or assistance with Medicare premiums or cost sharing through one of the Medicare Savings Program categories. So Medicare pays covered medical services first for dual eligible beneficiaries because Medicaid is considered the payer of last resort, and then Medicaid may cover medical costs that Medicare may not cover or partially covers, such as nursing home care, personal care, and home and community-based services. So the dual eligible coverage is the same. Private insurance coverage is also the same. So when there's more than one payer, the coordination of benefits rules decide which one pays first. The primary payer pays what it owes on your bills first and then sends the rest to the secondary payer to pay. And this process is the same and unaffected by the Review Choice Demonstration Project. Finally, access to care and services should not be delayed for people with Medicare home health benefits. Things like the face-to-face encounter, patient admission and intake process, the RAP can all take place the same as if the Review Choice Demonstration Project or RCD was not in effect. With that, I'll go on to the next slide. We wanted to go over some of the comments and responses to the 60-day Federal Register notice. And you may recall that Ashley had mentioned the Paperwork Reduction Act. And this act also actually requires that federal agencies are required to publish notice in the Federal Register concerning each proposed collection of information. And so accordingly, notice regarding RCD was published in the Federal Register. And if you have some time, we would encourage you to review the comments from stakeholders and CMS's responses, which are available in an appendix on CMS's website. If you need that link, feel free to reach out to me or Ashley. They're really helpful to see what the concerns have been, which you yourselves might have, and what CMS's position is. It's also, I find it helpful to review it to sort of memorialize exactly what the framework of RCD is. So we would encourage you to look at that. But I'll go over some of the concern categories and what the stakeholders specifically expressed concern about and how CMS responded. So the first category I'll call timely access to home health care and quality of home health care. And stakeholders expressed concerns about, for example, delays in care or lack of access for Medicare beneficiaries, especially in rural areas. And this is as a result of RCD, they're saying. And also that prior authorization could weigh heavily on agency budgeting for staff, which would directly affect the quality of care provided. And CMS responded in part as follows. Beneficiaries do not have to wait for pre-claim review decisions to begin receiving home health services, and they can continue to receive those services while the pre-claim review process is in progress. CMS also said the agencies will collect the same information and documentation as they currently are required to under the home health benefit, and agencies that choose the pre-claim review option will conduct all necessary intake procedures and evaluations, submit a RAP, and begin services as they currently already do. And finally, that the pre-claim review request may be completed and submitted for review at any time prior to the submission of the final claim for payment. CMS also mentioned that agencies who do not wish to participate in either the pre-claim or post-payment review option have the option to furnish home health services and submit the associated claim for payment without undergoing such reviews, with, of course, as Ashley shared, with the reduction of 25% off the claim. So CMS did not agree that the Review Choice Demonstration Project would adversely affect timely access to home health care or quality of home health care. Another category of concern expressed by stakeholders was the administrative costs and burdens to home health agencies. So, for example, stakeholders, which could be home health agencies, could be other concerned citizens, beneficiaries, they express concern about, for example, increase in administrative burden and or cost for providers, increased paperwork on home health agencies, that the process would be too complex and time-consuming. One commenter specifically reported that their participation in the original pre-claim review demonstration took 1 hour per claim. And stakeholders also expressed concern about cash flow issues causing providers to close or to move away from Medicare. CMS responded in part as follows. They specifically restructured the demonstration project in consideration of the potential burden on home health agencies. And I'm going to quote what they said here. In an effort to create a process that balances provider burden while continuing our fiduciary responsibility to lower the home health improper payment rate and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, CMS restructured the demonstration services based on input from the provider community and other stakeholders. The revised review choice demonstration offers increased flexibility, provider choice, as well as additional risk-based changes, end quote. They also said things like the pre-claim review option doesn't create any new documentation or administrative requirements, as we discussed, and instead it just requires the currently needed documents to be submitted earlier in the claim process. CMS stated that having an affirmed pre-claim review decision will help the cash flow for the provider, as an affirmative decision shows that a claim likely meets Medicare coverage and payment rules. I thought it was interesting that they said likely. So similar to prior authorizations, they're not necessarily indicating that an affirmation means that the claim won't later be reviewed and then denied. So that's not very reassuring. CMS also responded in regard to this administrative costs and burdens concern that the agency ultimately gets to decide what the best option is for them based on the size of their agency, resources, and financial needs, and they can change their choice if they believe another option will work for their resources. A third category of concern from stakeholders was increased hospitalization and inpatient facility stays. Stakeholders expressed concern about, for example, smaller agencies continuing to push patients to higher cost care in SNFs, skilled nursing facilities, and long-term care hospitals. And also that the demonstration will increase hospitalization rates, leading to long-term healthcare consequences and associated costs. And CMS responded in part as follows, that RCD does not restrict access to home health care services that are medically necessary and meet all the coverage requirements. They also said that discharge from an institution to home will not be delayed as the process for initiating home health services, the order, the home health visit, the initiation of the RAP has not changed. They also said the home health services for beneficiaries is not being restricted under the demonstration project. And so therefore beneficiaries are not required to have any additional hospitalization services not normally needed or be pushed into SNFs or long-term care hospitals. Interestingly here, CMS noted that it will be contracting with an independent evaluator to fully analyze the impacts of the demonstration, including effects on patient care and access to covered services. And I quickly wanted to mention one other category of concern that is not on this slide, which is that RCD is not the best method to identify fraud. Stakeholders said things like the initial demonstration was ineffective at identifying fraud, and most errors were found in the initial, and most of the errors that were found in the initial demonstration were human and clerical errors. They also said that the high affirmation rate seen in the initial demonstration established that the central issue was not fraud or medically unnecessary claims, but improper payments. And they some people thought CMS should utilize other resources over the RCD project, like data analytics or PEPPER, which PEPPER stands for the Programs to Evaluate Payment Patterns electronic report. They recommended that CMS use those mechanisms to assist in identifying patterns that appear to be out of norm and target those agencies to use fraudulent tactics. And CMS responded that the demonstration targets fraud by identifying an either non-affirming pre-claim review request or denying claims that are not medically necessary, not covered under the Medicare benefit, or should not be paid due to other reasons. And they said that by reviewing each episode of care, CMS would be able to determine if providers have a pattern of submitting medically unnecessary services, if the documentation is insufficient to support the services, or if there are any other compliance concerns evident from that documentation. Another interesting thing, which Ashley had actually mentioned, is that there were some providers that had circumvented the pre-claim review process, and they waited for, in some cases, the process to end to file the claims. And in some instances, CMS did share that information and make referrals to UPICs and law enforcement based on agency behavior during the pre-claim process. Okay, next slide. So of course there's what CMS says, and there's the realities that we certainly appreciate representing home health agencies in Texas and across the country. So we're going to talk a little bit about the impact on home health agencies here. We do think that the cost to process a claim will be significantly higher for the next 5 years. Given the additional paperwork and the effort to submit documentation for an episode, that is not being compensated and will likely prove difficult for agencies currently facing rising costs and ever diminishing profit margins. We certainly appreciate that the agencies are going to and need to really take the time to review their internal documentation processes, review and compile documentation for claims prior to submission. It's a necessary quality assurance step to make sure that you do everything you can to get your claim paid in the pre-claim or post-payment review process, and that is going to take time and therefore resources, and we don't think that CMS necessarily appreciates that. Home health agencies should expect to receive a significant percentage of denials initially, and these denials will result in cash flow delays. Usually we find that at the beginning of a review, like during the probe and target and educate review process and in other prepayment review processes, we do see at the beginning that there are increased denials, especially if agencies try and navigate the process on their own. Once they get some feedback from Medicare and they have a third party like an attorney or another quality assurance company look over their claims and give some feedback, we see that agencies do have improved payment rates after they've implemented that feedback. So again, initially, do expect some adverse determinations as your agency is navigating the process and then updating policies and training to make sure that the claims achieve home health coverage and payment rules. And something that I think Ashley and I have both touched on a couple of times now is the administrative appeals process does remain broken. And if you're unable to obtain payment through pre-claim or post-pay, then you do have to go through the appeals process, and that can take 3 to 5 years. Though CMS is trying to implement measures to get through the backlog, but we really haven't seen the backlog improve much. And so the risk is if you don't get payment and you have to go into the appeals process, it could be a long time before you see that money, especially if you don't have favorable determinations early on. And finally, unless small and mid-sized agencies work to aggressively improve their compliance with applicable documentation, coverage of payment requirements, we anticipate a number of closures over the next 5 years. And that is a really sad reality for us. But if agencies aren't putting in the necessary training and updates to their documentation, and they get a lot of denials, or they get a lot of denials that result in referral for UPIC or something like that, and have a much higher alleged overpayment through extrapolation or suspension, it really is the case that we see that some of these agencies just cannot make it out of the suppression of their revenue cycle in those instances, and they can't continue servicing Medicare patients, unfortunately. So with that, we'll go on to the final slide here. And these are our recommendations for agencies to prepare for RCD project and also Medicare audits in general. So you should begin preparing now. And at a minimum, that should include hiring additional staff members or reallocating staff to handle the submission process. You know, who's intaking the ADRs, who's tracking the timelines for submitting documentation, who's putting together the documentation, who's QAing the documentation before it goes off to Medicare, who's intaking the determination, who's following the appeals process. You need to have people on the ground that are going to be responsible for this process so that no claims get overlooked and you don't lose out on reimbursement in the event of missing responding to an ADR or missing an appeal deadline, for example. You really want to train your staff as to what will be required, and you want to meet with your referral sources to educate them about RCD2. This is not just internal. You know that you work with certifying physicians that might refer to you. You work with hospitals. You work with SNFs. All those people need to understand the, home health documentation requirements, like what you need for a face-to-face, and they should also be aware about RCD so that they can be prepared to respond expeditiously with and for you. Finally, you should expect disruptions to your Medicare reimbursement. You should meet with your CFO to develop a business plan that will allow your agency to remain solvent without regular flow of Medicare payments. And if you're able to do so, which we realize it's difficult with home health, given the demographic of your patient base, but you should diversify your payer sources. And you might think it might not happen to you, but at the very least, create a plan. So with that, we have a few minutes to answer questions. I'm not sure if we've received any on the chat, but Marissa, have we received any questions that our attendees would like for us to answer?
I do see some. This is Ashley, Lorraine, that we have gotten. I can answer this first one. I think, how will the agency be contacted to make choices for the review choice demonstration project? They have said that you're going to get at least 60 days notice before implementation, and that CMS and Palmetto are going to notify the providers in each state prior to the start of the demonstration in the state. I, however, haven't seen much other guidance regarding that issue. I don't know, Lorraine, if you've seen anything else regarding how they're going to be contacting agencies besides that. Yeah, so that's still to come. More information on that. Another question I'm seeing is, in the mid-'80s, an agency I was with participated in CMS's prior authorization program. We are required to have the documentations to them within a specified time, and they had 3 days to provide a response. Are there any timeframes established with this project? Well, they're issuing ADRs for the post-payment. Typically, you have 45 days to respond to an ADR. For the pre-claim review, I haven't seen a timeline for providing the documentation besides, that general ADR timeline. So they've just specified the amount of time that the MAC is going to be responding. Lorraine, have you seen anything different?
No, I haven't, but I can say for sure that it's not going to be 3 days. I mean, I know for certain that Palmetto would not be able to make a review determination within 3 days. So I imagine that it will be 45 days as with the ADR, but I think as the RCD rolls out in various states, including in Texas, that we'll get more information about that. But I imagine it's going to be in the 30 to 60 day range and not in the single digits.
Yeah. And then we've got a similar question twice, is whether or not the RAP is going to be affected, sending the RAP, and what documents have been sent. And Lorraine, you went over this in detail, but I don't know if you want to just quickly summarize again.
Yeah, so the RAP is not affected. It's still being processed the same way. And then what paperwork will be required for pre-claim review? Well, it's the same for any review. You know, we talked about some of the main documentation, the plan of care, the face-to-face documentation, the physician certification, but it's also going to include all of the clinical notes in support of the disciplines that were provided, whether it's skilled nursing, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and or speech therapy, any other physician orders that were made, perhaps regarding increased frequency of a certain discipline or a medication, what have you. So it's going to be everything. And, you know, they might tell you they might put together a list of documentation they expect to see. And typically their list is a lot different than what our list looks like in terms of our experience about what gets a claim paid versus what documentation is not sufficient to do so. So if you have any questions about what you need to put together, or if you want any help you know, responding to the initial ADRs to come up with a good list, feel free to reach out to me or Ashley.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy to take a look or help you do a gap analysis or something like that prior to the documentation going in, or prior to the demonstration project getting started in Texas. I think that's all of the questions that we have right now. Salma's telling me that's about it. So if anyone else has any other questions, Lorraine and I, our contact information is on the screen, our email addresses, and we can both be contacted at that same phone number. Please feel free to reach out to us with any other questions. Thank you, Lorraine, for doing such a great presentation with me today. Yeah, yeah, and thanks everyone for joining us.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.